The 7 biblical signs God is correcting your path. There are moments in life when progress suddenly becomes more difficult than expected. Plans that once seemed clear begin to encounter resistance. Decisions that felt right start producing unexpected tension. Situations that once moved forward smoothly begin slowing down, forcing you to reconsider what you thought was certain. At first, these moments can feel frustrating, even confusing. You may wonder whether you made the wrong choice, misjudged a situation, or simply lost momentum. But not every interruption is a mistake. The Bible shows that God often guides people not only through opportunities, but through correction. Correction is not punishment, it is direction. It is one of the ways God protects, redirects, and refines a person's path when something is moving out of alignment with His wisdom. Throughout Scripture, correction appears as a form of care. A loving parent corrects a child not to harm them, but to guide them toward maturity. In the same way, God's correction is an expression of His attention. It reveals that He is involved, attentive, and committed to shaping the direction of a person's life. Yet recognizing correction in real time is not always easy. Psychologically, human beings tend to interpret obstacles as failure. When progress slows, the natural reaction is to push harder, insist on the original plan, or become discouraged. But spiritual growth often requires a different response, one that pauses long enough to ask whether resistance may be revealing something important. Sometimes what feels like frustration is actually protection. A closed door may prevent a harmful decision. A delay may create space for reflection. A difficult conversation may expose a misunderstanding that needs to be addressed before moving forward. These moments can feel uncomfortable, but they often carry wisdom when viewed with patience. God rarely corrects through dramatic force. More often, He works through subtle signals, patterns that repeat, unease that grows, plans that change direction unexpectedly. Over time, these signals invite reflection. They encourage a person to slow down, reassess, and consider whether their current path still aligns with what is wise and meaningful. This process requires humility. Correction asks a person to remain teachable. It invites them to consider that guidance may come through difficulty, not only through success. And when approached with openness, correction becomes one of the most powerful tools for growth. In this message, we will explore several biblical signs that may indicate God is correcting your path. These signs are not meant to create fear or discouragement. Instead, they are meant to help you recognize when adjustment is necessary and when change may lead to greater clarity, stability, and purpose. Because sometimes the most important progress in life begins with correction. The first sign that God may be correcting your path is this: what once felt easy begins to feel unusually difficult. There are seasons in life when progress seems natural. Opportunities appear at the right time, decisions unfold smoothly, effort produces predictable results. During these periods, it is easy to assume that the path ahead is clear and stable, but then something begins to change. Tasks that were once manageable start requiring more effort than expected. Conversations become more complicated. Plans that seemed certain begin encountering resistance from multiple directions. What once felt straightforward begins to feel strained. At first, this difficulty can feel discouraging. You may wonder whether you have lost momentum or made a mistake. You may assume that working harder will restore the previous sense of ease, and sometimes persistence is the right response. But not always. Scripture shows that increased difficulty can sometimes function as guidance. In several biblical stories, individuals experienced resistance when they began moving in directions that required reconsideration. The resistance itself became an invitation to pause and reflect. Instead of forcing progress, they were called to examine whether their current path still aligned with wisdom. Psychologically, sudden difficulty often creates tension because it disrupts expectation. Human beings prefer predictable outcomes. When effort no longer produces the results it once did, frustration naturally appears. The mind searches for solutions, trying to restore control over the situation. Yet difficulty can also serve as information. It can reveal misalignment that was not visible before. It can expose weaknesses in planning, communication, or judgment. It can signal that circumstances have changed in ways that require adjustment. Spiritually, this kind of resistance may indicate correction. God does not always remove ease immediately, but when a path begins to drift away from what is wise, the environment may become more challenging. The difficulty is not meant to punish. It is meant to slow progress long enough for reflection to occur. Over time, many people look back and recognize that certain obstacles protected them. What felt like frustration in the moment later revealed itself as necessary interruption. A project that stalled prevented a larger mistake. A relationship that became complicated exposed issues that needed attention. A plan that failed created space for a better direction to emerge. This perspective rarely appears immediately. In the moment, difficulty feels like opposition, but with patience, it often becomes clarity. Learning to recognize this sign requires discernment. Not every challenge means you are on the wrong path. Life naturally includes effort and perseverance, but when difficulty becomes persistent, unusual, and accompanied by growing tension, it may be worth asking a deeper question. Is this resistance simply a problem to overcome, or is it a signal to reconsider the direction? When what once felt easy begins to feel consistently difficult, it is often not something to ignore. It may be one of the first ways God gently slows your steps, not to stop your progress, but to guide it in a wiser direction. The second sign that God may be correcting your path is this. You begin to feel a growing loss of peace about a decision you once felt confident about. There are moments when a decision initially feels clear. You evaluate the situation, consider the available information, and move forward with confidence. At the time, everything seems reasonable. The direction appears logical, and the outcome seems promising. You proceed with a sense of certainty that you are making the right choice. But then, over time, something begins to shift internally. The confidence that once felt steady starts to weaken. A subtle uneasiness appears. You may find yourself revisiting the same decision repeatedly in your mind, not because circumstances have dramatically changed, but because your sense of peace about the direction has quietly faded. At first, this loss of peace can be confusing. You may try to reassure yourself that the original decision was sound. You may remind yourself of the reasons that led you to that choice. Yet despite these efforts, the uneasiness remains. Scripture often describes peace as an internal guide. In the biblical understanding, peace is not merely the absence of conflict. It is a sense of alignment between the heart, the mind, and the direction a person is taking. When that alignment begins to weaken, the loss of peace becomes a signal that something may require attention. Psychologically, this experience reflects the mind's sensitivity to inconsistency. When new information, emotional awareness, or changing circumstances begin to challenge a previous decision, the brain responds with tension. This tension is not always dramatic, but it can manifest as persistent doubt, hesitation, or discomfort. Spiritually, this tension may be part of correction. God often works through the quiet removal of peace rather than through dramatic warning. The absence of peace creates space for reflection. It encourages a person to slow down, reconsider, and evaluate whether their current direction still aligns with wisdom. Many people initially resist this signal. They may push forward despite the uneasiness, believing that persistence will restore confidence. But when the loss of peace continues, it becomes harder to ignore. Over time, the discomfort often leads to deeper clarity. A person begins to notice details they previously overlooked. They may recognize risks they underestimated, or motivations they did not fully examine. The uneasiness becomes understandable rather than mysterious. This process does not mean the original decision was wrong. It means that awareness has grown. God's correction is rarely about condemnation. It is about refinement. As understanding deepens, adjustments become possible. A person may modify their plan, change their approach, or step back entirely from a direction that no longer feels wise. In hindsight, many believers recognize that the loss of peace was one of the earliest signs of guidance. It prevented them from continuing down a path that would have led to unnecessary difficulty. It redirected their attention before consequences became more severe. Learning to recognize this sign requires attentiveness. Peace is not always loud, but its absence can speak clearly. When you begin to notice a persistent loss of peace about a decision you once felt certain about, it may not be confusion alone. It may be God gently inviting you to reconsider your path before moving further. The third sign that God may be correcting your path is this. People you trust begin raising concerns that you did not expect to hear. At first, these conversations can feel uncomfortable. You may share your plans, your ideas, or your direction with someone who knows you well, expecting encouragement or agreement. Instead, they respond with hesitation. They ask questions that feel unexpected. They express concern in ways that make you pause. Their words are not hostile. They are thoughtful, yet something about their perspective creates tension within you. Your first reaction may be defensive. You may feel the need to explain your reasoning more clearly or to justify the decision you have made. This response is natural. Human beings tend to protect their plans, especially when they have invested time, energy, and hope into them. But Scripture shows that God often uses the voices of others as instruments of correction. Throughout the Bible, guidance frequently comes through relationships. Wise counsel appears not only through personal reflection, but through trusted individuals who can see what we may overlook. Their perspective provides balance when our own judgment becomes too narrow or emotionally invested. Psychologically, this dynamic is important. Every person has blind spots. When someone becomes deeply focused on a particular goal or direction, their attention naturally narrows. They begin filtering information in ways that support their decision. This is not intentional deception. It is a normal cognitive process. The mind protects its commitment by minimizing conflicting signals. This is why outside perspective matters. Trusted people can observe patterns that we cannot easily see from within our own experience. They may notice risks, inconsistencies, or emotional motivations that are hidden beneath our confidence. Their insight creates an opportunity for reflection. Spiritually, this kind of feedback can function as correction. God rarely isolates a person from wise counsel. Instead, he often places voices of wisdom along the path, mentors, friends, family members, or spiritual leaders who offer perspective at the right moment. Their words may not always feel comfortable, but comfort is not always the goal. Clarity is. Over time, many people recognize that the advice they initially resisted was exactly what they needed to hear. A warning that felt inconvenient prevented a costly mistake. A question that seemed unnecessary revealed a deeper issue that required attention. This realization often comes later. In the moment, the tension may feel frustrating, but with patience, it becomes meaningful. Learning to recognize this sign requires humility. Instead of dismissing concerns immediately, the believer pauses to listen carefully. They consider whether the message carries wisdom, even if it challenges their expectations. They ask themselves whether the discomfort they feel is resistance to correction or simply a reaction to unexpected feedback. When trusted voices begin raising thoughtful concerns about your direction, it is rarely something to ignore. It may be one of the ways God gently places guidance in your path, not to control your decisions, but to help you see more clearly before moving forward. The fourth sign that God may be correcting your path is this: your priorities begin to shift in ways you did not plan. There are seasons in life when certain goals feel central. You focus your energy on progress, achievement, stability, or recognition. These priorities shape your daily decisions. They determine how you spend your time, what you value, and what you consider success. For a while, this direction feels natural and justified. But then, something begins to change internally. What once felt urgent begins to feel less important. Goals that once motivated you strongly begin to lose their emotional weight. At the same time, new concerns start to rise, concerns you may not have considered before. You may find yourself thinking more about relationships than accomplishments. You may begin caring more about integrity than efficiency. You may start questioning whether the direction you are pursuing truly reflects your deeper values. At first, this shift can feel unsettling. You may wonder whether you are losing motivation or becoming distracted. You may try to push yourself back into the same level of focus you once had, but the change continues. Scripture often shows that correction begins with realignment of priorities. When a person's path starts drifting away from what truly matters, God does not always intervene by changing external circumstances immediately. Instead, He begins by reshaping the internal compass, the values that guide decisions. Psychologically, this process reflects growing awareness. As people mature, they naturally reassess what is meaningful. Experiences accumulate, consequences become clearer. The mind begins recognizing that some pursuits, while productive, may not be fulfilling or sustainable in the long term. This awareness leads to reordering. What once seemed essential becomes secondary. What once seemed minor becomes central. Spiritually, this reordering can be a form of correction. God gently redirects attention toward what carries lasting value. He invites the believer to consider not only what is possible, but what is wise. He shifts the focus from short-term success to long-term faithfulness. This transition often unfolds quietly. There may be no dramatic event announcing the change. Instead, the shift appears gradually, through reflection, conversations, and moments of insight. The person begins noticing that their heart is being drawn toward different priorities. Over time, this shift becomes clearer. Decisions that once felt obvious now require deeper thought. Activities that once filled your schedule begin to feel unnecessary. Opportunities that once seemed attractive begin to feel misaligned. Many believers later recognize that this change in priorities protected them. It prevented them from investing too much time in directions that would have led to imbalance. It guided them toward choices that supported stability, character, and purpose. Learning to recognize this sign requires attentiveness to your own values. When your priorities begin shifting in ways you did not plan, it is often not a loss of direction. It is a correction of direction. And through that quiet realignment, God is gently guiding your path toward what truly matters. The fifth sign that God may be correcting your path is this: you begin to recognize consequences more clearly than before. There are moments in life when decisions are made quickly, guided by emotion, pressure, or immediate opportunity. In those moments, the focus is often on the short-term outcome, what feels beneficial now, what seems convenient, or what promises fast results. But over time, something begins to change. You start noticing the long-term impact of your choices more vividly. Situations that once felt harmless begin revealing hidden costs. Habits that once seemed manageable begin showing patterns of strain. Decisions that once felt small begin carrying visible consequences. This growing awareness can feel uncomfortable. You may look back at previous actions and realize that they created challenges you did not anticipate. You may begin seeing connections between choices and outcomes that were previously overlooked. What once felt unrelated now appears clearly connected. Scripture often describes this kind of realization as part of wisdom. In the biblical understanding, wisdom is not simply knowledge. It is the ability to see how actions lead to results. It is the capacity to recognize cause and effect before consequences become severe. God's correction often works through this process of clarity. Instead of preventing every mistake, He allows a person to experience the natural outcome of certain decisions. These outcomes are not meant to punish, but to teach. They reveal patterns that need to be understood so that future choices can be made more wisely. Psychologically, this is how learning deepens. When consequences become visible, the mind becomes more attentive. It begins to evaluate decisions more carefully. Awareness replaces impulsiveness. Reflection replaces assumption. This shift marks the beginning of maturity. A person who once acted quickly begins to pause. They consider not only what they want in the moment, but what the decision will produce over time. They begin asking questions that were previously ignored. What will this lead to? What will this cost? Is this sustainable? Spiritually, this growing awareness is a form of correction. God gently trains the heart to think beyond the immediate moment. He teaches patience, foresight, and responsibility. He invites the believer to recognize that every decision carries weight, even when the impact is not visible right away. Over time, this clarity changes behavior. Choices become more intentional, risks are evaluated more carefully. Habits begin to shift because the person understands where those habits lead. Many believers later recognize that this stage of awareness protected them from greater harm. By seeing consequences early, they were able to adjust direction before the situation became more serious. What once felt like a mistake became a lesson that shaped future wisdom. Learning to recognize this sign requires honesty. It means acknowledging patterns without defensiveness. It means accepting responsibility without self-condemnation. It means allowing awareness to guide change. When consequences become clearer than before, it is often not simply a reminder of the past. It is a signal about the future. And through that clarity, God is gently correcting your path before small decisions grow into larger problems. The sixth sign that God may be correcting your path is this. Progress slows down in ways that force you to become more patient than you planned. There are seasons when life moves quickly. Opportunities appear in sequence. Plans develop without major interruption. Effort seems to produce visible results. During these periods, patience feels natural because progress confirms that things are moving forward. But then the pace changes. Projects take longer than expected. Answers do not arrive immediately. Situations that once moved smoothly begin requiring more time and attention. The delay may not be dramatic, but it is persistent enough to be noticed. At first, this slowdown can feel frustrating. You may feel ready to move forward while circumstances seem to hold you in place. You may begin asking why progress has stalled or why momentum has been interrupted. The natural reaction is often to push harder, to accelerate the process, or to search for ways to regain speed. Yet Scripture frequently shows that slowing down is one of the ways God shapes character. In many biblical accounts, important preparation happened during periods of waiting. These seasons were not wasted time. They created space for reflection, maturity, and clarity that would not have developed during rapid progress. Psychologically, patience is formed through delay. When outcomes are immediate, the mind becomes accustomed to quick results. But when progress slows, attention shifts inward. A person begins to evaluate their motives, their expectations, and their readiness for what lies ahead. This internal work often goes unnoticed at first. While the external situation appears stagnant, something deeper is developing. Perspective becomes clearer. emotional reactions become steadier. Decision-making becomes more thoughtful. Spiritually, this kind of delay can function as correction. God may slow the pace not to prevent progress, but to refine it. He may allow additional time so that a person can grow into the responsibility they are approaching. He may create space for wisdom to develop before the next step becomes visible. Over time, many people recognize that the delay protected them. If progress had continued too quickly, they may have moved forward without the maturity or understanding required to sustain the outcome. The waiting period, though uncomfortable, created strength that later proved essential. This realization often appears only in hindsight. In the moment, patience feels like limitation. But later, it becomes clear that the slower pace allowed important lessons to take root. Learning to recognize this sign requires trust. Instead of interpreting delay as failure, the believer begins to view it as preparation. They shift their focus from speed to readiness. They understand that growth often happens quietly during seasons when visible progress is limited. When progress slows in ways that require patience, it is often not a sign that something has gone wrong. It may be a sign that God is shaping your path carefully, ensuring that the next step is taken with wisdom rather than haste. The seventh sign that God may be correcting your path is this: you begin to develop a deeper desire for integrity, even when it makes life more difficult. There comes a point in spiritual growth when convenience begins to lose its appeal. Choices that once seemed harmless start to feel uncomfortable. Shortcuts that once felt efficient begin to feel misaligned. Situations that offered quick advantage begin raising quiet questions within your conscience. At first, this shift can feel inconvenient. You may realize that acting with integrity requires more effort than before. It may require honesty in conversations that would have been easier to avoid. It may require walking away from opportunities that once seemed beneficial. It may even require admitting mistakes that you would have previously tried to conceal. This new awareness is not accidental. Scripture often presents integrity as one of the clearest marks of a heart that is being corrected and refined. Integrity is not simply about following rules. It is about alignment between what a person believes, what they say, and what they do. When that alignment begins to matter more deeply, correction is already taking place. Psychologically, this shift reflects the development of internal consistency. As people mature, they become more sensitive to contradictions between their values and their actions. The mind begins recognizing that temporary convenience often creates long-term tension. What once felt like a small compromise now feels like a disruption to personal stability. This awareness creates a new kind of discomfort. Not the discomfort of external pressure, but the discomfort of internal conviction. A person may realize that they can no longer ignore certain choices without feeling unsettled. Their conscience becomes more active, more precise, and more difficult to silence. Spiritually, this is a sign of growth. God's correction often begins by strengthening the voice of conscience. He refines the heart so that integrity becomes more important than comfort. The believer begins valuing truth over convenience, responsibility over avoidance, and honesty over appearance. Over time, this change transforms decision-making. Instead of asking what is easiest, the person begins asking what is right. Instead of choosing the path that produces immediate benefit, they begin choosing the path that preserves long-term character. This shift can make life more challenging in the short term. Integrity sometimes requires sacrifice. It may involve slower progress, difficult conversations, or missed opportunities. But it also creates stability. A life built on integrity becomes more resilient because it is grounded in truth rather than convenience. I have seen this pattern unfold gradually in my own life as well. There were moments when choosing the easier option felt natural, especially when the consequences seemed small. But over time, I noticed that each compromise created a subtle sense of tension within me. Eventually, that tension became clarity. I realized that integrity was not about perfection. It was about alignment. It was about living in a way that allowed my decisions to reflect what I truly believed. This message reflects a spiritual understanding shaped through reflection, experience, and the quiet process of learning from correction. Growth rarely comes from dramatic change alone. It comes from repeated choices to live with honesty, humility, and responsibility. If this message helped you reflect on your own path, share in the comments which sign spoke to you the most. You can also write a simple commitment: God is guiding my direction. And remember this: correction is not a sign that your journey is failing. It is a sign that your path is being shaped with care.